All right, so we got everything up and running. Let's go ahead and get started with the class. Turn on the mic. There we go. Okay, the mic is working. All right. Go in. So today we'll start on, yep, go ahead. Very good. I like that question because I just checked and it is recording. In fact, since you asked, I'm going to double check and make sure we have capacity. So we got 43 gigabytes left. We're definitely good for today. Good. Thank you for checking. This is called a crowd memory. Nobody seems to be getting that one. Okay, so we got discrete, recursion. There's one more thing I want to do with probability before we get back into recursion with the master theorem. It's fairly short, but it does hook up to stuff that we have talked about so far. One has to do with conditional probability and Bayes' theorem. It is useful. We talked about this a little bit last time, and if you have logged into this document, you might have a chance to leave behind some comments already. You can see several people are in right now at this point. And I've got a few requests to gain access to the document. You have to sign into the apps.losrios.edu domain first. Then you can, then you have access to the document itself. But the HTML document you can access that anytime you want. Yep.
I am logged into the apps.losrios.edu account, but I can't make any comments on the file.
You cannot make any comments.
Request edit access.
No, I'm pretty sure I allow that. Okay, so this is how I set up the share. And go to advanced. Okay, so this one is on. Anyone with a link can view. Oh, okay, I see. Thank you. There we go. Now we can all comment. Cool. All right, so give it a try. Just refresh the page first in case it doesn't update by itself. Is it working? Yeah, I really kind of like this. It's really cool that people are signing in during class, so this is really kind of cool. I'm going to change the mode to minimize, to turn on full screen. So this way I get more space just to display the content. Okay, so this is all about conditional probability. Last time we talked about this a little bit already. So we're just going to go ahead and go from the beginning from last time. So the first part is really just explaining what is conditional probability. And the way to think about conditional probability is to think about set theory first. So last time I did not get a chance to do this, and today I got everything set up so we can actually do it this way. Which is using Venn diagram, okay? Using the notation of set in order to explain what is conditional probability. So let me start up my camera viewer, which is just VLC. There we go. And we got a flip side. Just flip it back like that. Okay. Let's just get it autofocus one more time so that we can get the crisper picture. Okay, so when we start, we're going to start with omega. What is omega in terms of probability?
The world of possibilities.
The set of all possible outcomes. Okay, so we're going to start with omega, which is everything that we can possibly think of is in this big omega. So conditional probability has to do with two subsets of omega. Okay, so we just randomly pick one subset A. Okay, so here's one subset A of omega. So we just say that A is a subset of omega. Now A can be omega itself, although in that case it's not very interesting. Okay, but technically A does not have to be a proper subset. It just has to be a subset of omega. And we'll just also pick another subset B, and I'll just make it overlap with A. So in this case we have B. B is also a subset of omega. Once again, B can also be omega itself, but when B is omega, it's not very interesting. Okay. So now you can see that there are portions of A that is not in the intersection, and there are portions of B that are not in the intersection. All right, so now we want to express the probabilities, okay? PA, okay, the probability of something, as an element, but it is also in A, is really the ratio of the two sets, or the cardinality of A versus the cardinality of omega. Is that okay? So A is just some kind of subset, for whatever reason is of interest to us, okay? And then PB is the same thing. The probability of something landing in the subset B is the cardinality of B divided by the cardinality of omega. So it's not really surprising. These two are really kind of symmetric. They're kind of the same thing. So the conditional probability is basically, we are looking for things that are in A while we are given that that thing is in B already. Okay? So let's take a look at the conditional probability of something in A given it is already in B. That's what this notation is. So when you see P in parentheses A bar B, it means the probability of finding something that is a part of set A given that it is already a part of set B. So that means if I want to use a pictorial representation, now we know what B is, right? B is this portion. That's pretty easy. So in a way, we are kind of looking at B as our quote-unquote new omega. Okay, this is the stuff that we're considering. We already know whatever is of interest to us is a part of B already. The question is, what are the chances that that is also a part of A? That's probability. That's conditional probability. So we are basically saying, okay, the ratio between the intersection as opposed to the section that is only in B but not shared with A. But when you look at a picture like this, and we already know that probability is really just the ratio of the cardinality, then you can just say, okay, we already know that the denominator is the cardinality of B because we are given that this thing is already in B. We are asking the question, what are the chances that it is also in A? So that means we're looking at the intersection area here as the numerator. That would be A intersecting with B. So that really is the conditional probability of something that is already known to be in B, but we want to find out what is the conditional probability of that thing in A as well. Yep.
Why wouldn't the denominator be omega? Why would it?
Because it's conditional. It's already conditional to being in B.
Because of the function parameter?
It's the definition. This is the definition of conditional probability. The flip side is you can say everything is conditional to omega before this class. Okay, when I say, okay, what are the chances that we end up with blah, 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 that is conditional to omega, which is the set of all possible outcomes. But in this case, I'm no longer looking at omega, and because omega is too big of a set, I'm just looking at a subset of omega and say, okay, let's just look at things that are already in set B. What are the chances of that one thing is also in A? So we're looking at the intersection of A and B and say, how does that relate to the entire B?
So when you say the probability of A or the probability of B,
The probability of something in A and the probability of something in B. An element, yep,
in omega.
in omega.
Okay, but when you have it denoted as A bar B, then
We already know it is in B. So we already know a particular element is in B, which has to be in omega as well, because B is a subset of omega. The question is, what are the chances that that is also in A, given that it is already in B? Sure. So it might be helpful to look at this, from the insurance, company perspective, because they do a lot of conditional probability. It makes a lot of sense for insurance companies. Okay, so we want to look at, set B. Okay, so in the real world, B can be representing people who drive a particular kind of car. Okay, so I'll just say that B is the set of drivers driving a new suburban. Okay. So omega is going to be drivers, just period. Okay, just general drivers. B is the subset of drivers who own or with high frequency drive a suburban. And we can look at set A as drivers involved in fatal accidents. Okay? So that's also out of omega, because omega is the set of all drivers, right? So set A is the subset of drivers involved in fatal accidents, all drivers involved in fatal accidents. And then set B are the drivers who drive a suburban, periodically, okay, with a certain frequency. Okay, so when you look at the intersection of A and B, it means people who meet both criteria, people who regularly drive a new suburban, and also people who get involved in fatal accidents. That's the intersection. But when you look at the number, when you look at the ratio, when you look at this part here, it is basically asking, out of all the people who drive a new suburban, what are the chances that one of these drivers would get involved in a fatal accident? Mm-hmm.
There's a lot because they're really shitty cars.
Well,
They have bad transmissions.
the only thing I know is the front end of a suburban is a wall.
The new transmissions is 6 speed and they're really crappy, man.
But that doesn't lead to fatal accidents necessarily.
Necessarily, like what? You're trying to avoid an accident and
Yeah. If they made the transmission of a suburban to my engine, which is a 1.3 liter Honda engine, I think the chances of a fatal accident would be lowered by at least a half. Because you just cannot get that fast.
Your engine wouldn't even be able to turn that transmission.
You just need to gear it up.
There's so much loss in that kind of transmission, you probably wouldn't build.
It's good for it's going to be good for crawling rocks, where speed is your enemy. Yep, go ahead.
If we reversed it, would it be equal to each other? So if we did the probability of B bar A?
Aha, well that's Bayes' theorem, so we'll get to that part. Okay, we will definitely get to that part today. Okay, so but why is this important? Okay, the conditional probability of A bar B in this case, why is that important? Because it helps to set up your premium. Okay, so now we take a look at another scenario. Okay, because the set of A is the set of all the drivers involved in fatal accidents. So now we have a set C here. Okay, and we'll say set C is the set of I'm not gonna qualify this any further. I'll just say MX5 drivers. Okay, MX5 is also known as the Miata. Okay, the cute little car. So then we can look at A bar C. Okay, so we look at A bar B. We look at A bar C, which is A intersecting with C, and then the cardinality over the cardinality of C itself. Okay. So when we refer to absolute numbers, we can say, oh, there are 100 times more people who are involved in fatal accidents, and there are 100 times more of those people driving Suburbans than there are people driving Miatas. But people can come back and argue and say, well, that's normal because there are a lot more Suburbans on the road than there are Miatas. Okay, because it's not conditional. On the other hand, when you look at A bar B versus A bar C, now we are looking only at people who get involved in fatal accidents. So now we are looking at, okay, only looking at people involved in fatal accidents. What are the chances of what are the chances of that person driving a Suburban as opposed to the chance of that person driving a Miata? That would still be impacted by the number of people who are actually driving Suburbans versus people driving Miatas. Okay, which is not indicative. That's not the reason why we jack up the insurance premium when people drive Suburbans. But the other way around is when you look at the conditional probability. Okay, so let's take a look at this one here, which is really just a flip side, B bar A. Okay. So when you look at B bar A, by definition, we know what that means, right? Because by definition, it simply means this is the cardinality of A intersecting with B, just like before. But this time it's not divided by the cardinality of B. This time it's divided by the cardinality of A. So this time, this number is of particular interest to insurance companies, because now they're asking the question of, given that somebody is driving a Suburban, what are the chances that that person will involve or statistically is involved in a fatal accident? Is that okay? So even if there are a lot more Suburbans out there, a lot more people driving Suburbans, this number is still useful. And then we can compare this number and say, is it greater than, is it less than the cardinality of C bar A? Okay, well, the probability of C bar A, which is A intersecting with C divided by the cardinality of A. So this time we are comparing the chances of someone owning or driving a Suburban getting involved in a fatal accident, as opposed to the chances of someone driving a Miata and getting involved in a fatal accident. So now the absolute number of how many people drive Suburbans becomes irrelevant. Yep.
This is like per capita?
It is per capita, yes. Except this time it's per Suburban driver or per Miata driver or per whatever vehicle driver. Okay, so this ratio becomes a lot more interesting because now they can say, oh, I know there are very few people driving Miatas out there, but given the conditional probability, there are, of these people, a very small percentage will get involved in a fatal accident. As opposed to, yes, there are a lot more people driving Suburbans, but the ratio of those people getting involved in a fatal accident is actually higher. It has nothing to do with the number of people to begin with. It has to do with the number of people driving a Suburban and getting involved in a fatal accident. It's the ratio that becomes important. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So it kind of got a little bit wordy and I didn't understand it fully, but you're saying that we should compare the given A as opposed to the given B or given C because they have a common denominator, like they're both.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, because only then you have something to compare. So they have to have the common base, then you can say, okay, these are all people getting involved. Because A is all the people getting involved in the fatal accident. So now we're asking, okay, out of these people, how many of these people drive a Suburban? How many of these people drive Miatas? Or is it the other way around? It's actually the other way around because, well, it depends on how you want to look at this, but the other way around shows the ratio. I mean, these two numbers actually shows you the actual ratio. If you look at the ratio of these two probabilities, it will give you an idea of how which vehicle you drive can impact the chances of getting involved in an accident. Whereas this one, okay, is given given someone is involved in a fatal car accident, this will tell you the chances of what type of vehicle that person is driving.
There's similar questions, but they're not like.
They're not the same, correct.
Exactly.
But when you are the car insurance company, which number do you look at? Both numbers can give you the same information because they can be transformed into each other. So Bayes' theorem basically says, yes, we have all the same information, it's just presented differently.
But just for following that thought, would the one that we just ended up showing where we're going, where our base is the totality of fatal accidents, wouldn't that give us a greater representation of like the deadliness of that vehicle, as opposed to comparing it to the totality of all drivers of that vehicle?
Okay, so if you want to look at the fatality or the danger of a particular vehicle, these two are the ones that you want to compare. Because this is the actual ratio of, so it doesn't matter how many people own a particular type of vehicle, it's the ratio of the number of accidents per, that is important. So that is the ratio that you want to look at when you want to assess, whether a particular vehicle is prone to the fatal accidents in this case. Yep.
So what would you use the other one for?
The other one, okay, the other one is basically looking at given you have someone involved in the car accident, okay? So if you have to guess what type of vehicle they were driving during in the accident, this will give you the probability. In other words, if you work for a police precinct, and somebody come in and just go like, oh, I just came back from a car accident, there's fatality, and somebody wants to start a pool to basically say, okay, let's guess, what type of vehicle is involved. That is what you need. Because this one, will give you the actual ratio of, knowing or the probability of, what kind of car is probably involved in a fatal accident. But it doesn't help with insurance companies because they are not interested in that number. They're interested in the ratio of the relative fatality of different vehicles.
The insurance company's like, which one?
The insurance companies are interested in this number, or the ratio between these two.
Is that one of the reasons why four-wheel drive vehicles are more expensive to insure?
No, I think most of that has to do with a few other factors. Now, remember, none of this is causal. It is only expressing a correlation as opposed to a causal relationship. In other words, when you look at this ratio here, let's say it shows that the fatal accident rate of Suburban driving is 5 times the accident rate or fatal accident rate of Miatas. Okay, it doesn't mean Suburban is the reason. Okay, there can be many other reasons that is causing the linking of the probabilities.
Personality of the people driving
Personality,
those types of cars.
Or what type of commercial they watch.
The type
Sorry?
of people
The
buy
fact that they're really heavy cars, and then it's not necessarily the people in the car that will probably kill the other person.
But that would still be a causal because you're still linking the vehicle as a reason for the accident, not so much the driver but the vehicle itself. But it can be something that's completely unrelated. It's possible that a Suburban is at least a 6-seater. They can have 9 people, I think. Yeah, because you can have 3 rows and each row has 3 people. So you have 9 people potentially talking and doing stuff at the same time, as opposed to a Miata, which only has 2 seats, of which one is usually empty. Just ask any MX-5 owner. Just ask any MX-5 owner. What do they do when they go balance their wheels? Okay? Does anyone know how people balance their wheels for Miata owners? They sit in the car on the rack because they want to get the perfect balance based on the one driver situation. Which which means they're not going to pick up another passenger.
Or maybe because you own such a car.
It's a
you
driver's
have to-
car. You cannot hear the other person for the most part. All that wind or the road noise is just going to drown out the other person. As opposed to a Suburban. I mean, Suburbans are extremely quiet in the inside, isn't it?
But a Miata also doesn't have a roof.
Well, that depends. That's a philosophical question. I'm not going to answer that one. With the previous generation, you can have a hard roof too. It's a powered retractable hardtop, PRHT.
So
The new ones don't have that anymore.
So you don't have any trunk space?
No, it has enough trunk space. Yep.
I have more space in my pocket than that.
But you don't need that much trunk space when you drive a Miata.
That's not what you do.
All right, but is that okay? I mean, does everybody kind of understand there's no causal relationship? It really is just a correlation. Okay, so in this case, the correlation is, how many people are in the vehicle? Okay, they can be distracting because they can all be talking, asking questions. Backseat driving, okay, just imagine you have 8 people doing backseat driving as opposed to 0.
You drop some people. That's what-
Okay? All right. So this is all good. Are we okay with this stuff here? Are there any questions about the concept of conditional probability or why it is useful? Okay? No questions? This is all good? Can someone think of a scenario where this can be useful but in finance? So let's say you are responsible for some kind of investment and you are trying to kind of keep track of how the stock is going and stuff like that. Would this be useful? How would that be useful? What would each subset be representing?
Number of investors.
The profit gain?
You could have stocks that go down and stocks that,
Yep.
like all stocks that go down, and then so the ones that stay consistent.
Mm-hmm.
So like what relative to fluctuations in the market that don't really change.
Yep, exactly. So the trick is how do you define the subsets? You can basically define a subset of all the stocks that has recently, like in a week or so, dropped by 5%, and then you have another subset of stocks that has in the same week has gone up by 2%. Okay, so if you're looking at the conditional probability, is there any causal relationship between these stocks going down by 5% in a week or more than 5%, and these stocks going up by at least 2% in the same week? Maybe there's no real reason to explain that, but as long as that conditional probability is there, okay, as an investor, you would say, hey, if next time I observe that these stocks are going down by 5% or more in a week, I probably want to buy more of that stock if the conditional probability is high. So there's a lot to really there's a lot of stuff you can do with conditional probability, and the key once again is how do you define set A and set B. Without computers, you can't really do a whole lot, but with computers you can go back to the log of how stock values have changed over time, and then you can start to you can start to identify indicators, okay, by comparing the conditional probabilities. They can start to identify, have the computer to help identify how to classify the sets, so that way you can have your indicators ready. The next time there's any type of movement in stock, you can go, okay, looking at this stuff here, looking at this stuff here, there's a high probability that these stocks will go up or go down. Yep.
I feel sort of like this was pretty close to when you were giving the example of string copy in programs that have security.
Yep.
So this is the exact same thing that you would end up
It is related to that one because I was using that as the introduction into conditional
so yeah,
probability.
you're using this, you just haven't shown
Oh, yeah.
the actual map.
Right. I didn't show it as a set where omega is the overall and then A and B being subsets. So when I talked about the string copy leading to vulnerabilities, that one is just kind of more of a dry talk, but it's really is the same thing too, where one set is representing all the software titles that has this particular property, and then the other set is representing all the software title that has the other probability, and then you're looking at the intersection. The question is, what is the ratio of the intersection as opposed to one of the subsets? Okay, so are we good on this one? Okay, so we're going to move on to Bayes' theorem, which is really just a correlation. It's not a correlation, but it's really a follow-up topic on this one. Bayes' theorem, this is all it's saying. Okay, this is Bayes' theorem all by itself. It's basically saying if you know the conditional probability of A bar B, you know the probability of B itself, you know the probability of A itself, you can compute the conditional probability of B bar A, okay, which is kind of what we talked about earlier, okay? So the proof is just what is following right here. This is the proof. So the first part here is basically by the definition of conditional probability. B bar A, or the probability of B bar A, is the is the probability of B intersecting with A divided by the probability of A. And then the next one is by commutative property. So I'm just looking at the first part, which is copied from the top, and this is the second part here. The only change is, B intersecting with A is the same with A intersecting with B, because intersection is commutative. Is that okay? All right, so that's the second line. On the third line, it is a little bit more tricky because I changed the numerator. The numerator is A intersecting with B, but we already know that A intersecting with B is the probability of A intersecting with B divided by the probability of B times the probability of B. In other words, all I'm doing is by the identity of multiplication, because we got PB as the numerator and then we got PB as the denominator. That's just multiplying something by 1 should not be a problem. But that, in return, when you look at just this part here, okay, I cannot, let's see if I can just highlight the portion that I want. No, it doesn't really quite just highlight that part. But when you look at P A intersecting with B divided by PB, that's the definition of P A bar B. So that's why we can go from this ratio to this particular ratio, and that's the end of the proof. Are we doing okay with this? All right. And this is just a made-up example, of string copy versus the likelihood of a particular software title having a vulnerability. Is there a causal relationship? That's not suggesting a causal relationship. It's simply suggesting there's a correlation. Okay? It is possible that there's no actual causal relationship. It's just that people who choose to use string copy also tend to be sloppy programmers, not using the object-oriented way of dealing with strings, right? Okay, maybe that's the reason. Maybe it has nothing to do with string copy itself. Okay, now we know that it has something to do with string copy itself, but when you look at just the conditional probability, it does not say anything about this is the reason that happens. It simply means the conditional probability is higher. That's all it's saying. Are we doing okay so far with this stuff here? Okay. How would you apply conditional probability with choosing who is teaching your next class?
1 equals 1.
It all depends on what your
Good
sets are.
professor.
Hmm?
Good rate professor.
There are certain websites, not only rated by professors, certain websites actually keep track of the probabilities of the distributions of A, B, C, D, F. Okay? So that's conditional because it's conditional to who is teaching that class. So when you look at, let's say, Damon Antos, okay? So let's say in Damon Antos' class, okay? I'm just using it as an example completely, made up here, okay? So let's just say that, okay, so this is the example. Let me.
How about say you are getting recorded?
I am getting recorded, that's
Close
okay.
that up.
He's like, that's right down on the wall, actually.
Yeah. With permanent markers, yes. Okay, so let's say, in this case, the chances of getting an A, okay, so getting an A conditional to you're in Anton's class is, well, the usual ratio is about 20% or so, okay? And let's say you're getting an A out of Professor Fox's class is 0.3, okay? So that might change the way you choose, who you take from, given the choice is there, okay? If they're both teaching a particular class, some people may use this as a criteria and just, okay, I'm going to choose my next class based on these conditional probabilities. But it's conditional, because in this case it's conditional to who is teaching the class. So we have been using conditional probabilities all along. We just don't know it is called conditional probability. Is that, yep?
Would the omega be the like the curricular class that they're teaching out of all teachers that teach this class?
Okay, so that's a good question. Okay, so we have to basically look at this number here and say, okay, it's a ratio of something, right? Because it has no units by itself. It's not 0.2 class, it's not 0.2 GPA. It has no unit. It's a ratio, okay? So now you want to look at the omega, okay? And you want to look at these two particular sets, okay? So you have A, and then you have the other set here. And then you have to ask yourself, what exactly is omega in this case? Or who are the outcomes? Okay? The outcome in this case will be
all the students have taken
getting an A at the end of a particular class, right? So in this case, omega is representing the outcomes, and each outcome is getting an A out of a particular class. I'll just call it cisp440.
Wouldn't you need three circles? Wouldn't you need three circles? Because one would represent all the students that got an A in CISP for 40 or whatever class, and then
That's omega.
Well,
In this case, we're only interested because whoever is looking at these charts is only interested in getting an A. So that's why our entire omega is just getting an A out of this particular class. Yes.
Wouldn't, if we're phrasing it that way, wouldn't those two subs?
Oh, one of them would actually be the entire set. Okay, you're right.
Yeah.
So
If you're an answer complex, you're not getting any.
Okay, so let's scratch that. The omega is going to be grade received. That's good. Grade received in a particular class, so we can just focus on one class for 100. Okay, there we go. Okay, so this time we have something to compare. Yep.
So would this be like the summation of all the students that took 400?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
Yes,
omega.
including repeats. Including people who drop the class or get a D. Because those would have multiple entries. Because each. So it's going to be specific to the section itself. It's going to be in database concept. It's going to be the cross product. It's going to be specific. So each element. Okay, I'll just pick one element here. Is going to indicate which semester. It's going to indicate the student ID and also the grade. So these three pieces of information will be in each element. Okay. So that means if somebody took a class like 2 twice, then that person will have 2 representations here. So in that case, we can now say, Antos is one particular set. So this particular bubble or this particular set is representing all the people who have taken the class from David Antos. Okay. And depending on how you want to do it, but the most simplistic way to look at this is this particular set here is representing all students who have gotten an A out of CISP 400, regardless of who is teaching that class. So the probability of A bar Antos is now the ratio of this area over this entire area over here. Okay. Are there any questions about this?
If you allow repeats, though, that would make
And that information, by the way, is public information. It's public record. Your actual individual grade is protected by FERPA, which is for student privacy. But the collective statistics of each class is actually public information. The state is required to disclose that information to whoever or whomever is asking for the information.
It's published?
It is published. And there are websites that actually collect all this information, and they can show you all the statistics already.
Per the teacher?
Per teacher too, actually. Yep. Now, but the actual, but what you guys need to focus on, what I think you guys should focus on is the conditional probability of someone making $120,000 within 3 years and getting into the industry. Yeah, that would be the actual usable outcome that I think is important.
Not the low amount of students who've gotten an A in your class.
Or spending less than a certain amount of time per semester to study, that sort of thing.
I don't know if they collect that information though.
Now that is probably impossible to collect.
Yeah, because nobody's going to keep the actual.
Well, I can count the number of clicks per student, but that is not indicative because someone can click once, download, and print out the entire thing, and then just read it, whenever possible. So it's not indicative of how many people or how frequently people study. Someone can click all day long and not study at all. They just want to generate the clicks, right? And in fact, somebody can write a Perl script to do it on a particular computer, so end up with like hundreds of clicks per day.
Man, that gets.
But you'd probably find a pattern to that and say, oh.
Oh, you can randomize that, right? You can apply your statistics to randomize that, so it follows a particular bell curve.
So if those are protected, does that mean if somebody wants to know what grade you got in the class, you
Sorry?
don't have to tell them?
What?
So if these are protected, does that mean that you don't have to tell anybody what you got in a certain class?
As a student?
Yeah.
Absolutely not. You do not have to tell anyone.
So how do you apply for college then? Can you put decline to state?
Like a volunteer.
That's
It's going to be declined to accept.
I think that only applies to situations where they do not have the right to do it.
Okay.
If you think about it, okay, so let's say you're dealing with the application of college, okay, you're transferring, okay, where the university will ask you, okay, I need your transcript, I need to know how well you're doing in your classes or classes that you have taken. And most people comply and go like, okay, here's my transcript. And here's me saying, nope, based on FERPA, I want to know that you actually have the right to request this transcript. Well, guess what the application processor is going to do?
Drop you.
No, the processor is going to say, okay, I am going to go through the right channels to have whoever is responsible to look into it first. Does the university registrar has the right to ask for a transcript? And then have that person to reply back to you in a few months to quote the law and say, yes, we do have the right to request your transcript and not ask you any further for your transcript.
So you can say the deadline has
So that's kind of the balance between that. But you might want to look it up too. Can you just say that I don't want to submit my transcript, and neither shall the university use a transcript as one of the basis to choose the students to transfer.
Not transferring credits, yeah.
Because they need some way to evaluate, right? To assess, who to accept and who not to accept. So, they have to find a way to do it.
But like an employer,
Oh, yeah.
if your employer asks like, hey, how'd you do in Fox's class? You can be like, I don't want to talk about it.
Your employers, absolutely. That really applies to in the case of a job interview. Once again, it boils down to if all the other applicants supply, and you decline to supply that becomes a potential issue because they might think there are reasons why you're not submitting your transcript.
But you're more than welcome to.
But on the other hand, no one can, okay, on the other hand, if I post your grade at my door, that would be illegal. I would be violating FERPA for that because of that. Because then anyone who walks by can say, oh, okay, so-and-so is getting this grade out of this class. Now, even if I chop off the first n digits of the student ID, or I jumble it up in a certain way so that people cannot easily tell who is whom, that would still be illegal because people can just unscramble it and figure out.
So does that mean that when teachers pass around the clipboard with all the grades on it and the student IDs, they're technically breaking the law?
Yeah.
It depends on whether it is the actual final score or is it a score for a particular homework assignment. I believe the gray area is if it is just a grade for a particular homework assignment, it doesn't count into, FERPA does not cover individual homework assignments. Yep, you had a question?
Wait, what about teachers that have they assign ID numbers to each student and then they post it?
It depends on whether you can figure out, it all depends on whether you or other people can figure out who is whom based on the so-called randomly generated ID. If they have a way to kind of guesstimate, who is whom, based on maybe it's sorted by the last name of the student and not by the randomized student ID. So if there's a way to reverse it, it is actually breaking the law. All right. So are we good on conditional probability? Yep. Go ahead.
If it was the probability of Antos bar A, would that mean out of all the people who got A's, how much percent of them?
Yes. Yep. That's exactly what it is. Which may be useful, but it's not generally very useful because there may be more people getting A's. There may be more people coming out of Antos classes getting A's, but that can be because Antos just teaches more sections of that class. So for people who want to get an A out of the class or having a higher probability of getting an A out of the class, Antos bar A is not as useful as A bar Antos. Okay. Any other questions? No questions? Okay. How would this relate back to the first question of the second exam? Please don't mention that. Remember, all that stuff is collected in the lab? Remember that? Okay, we transmit a 1 and see what is received. That's conditional probability. Because what we're dealing with is what is transmitted and what is received.
So are you teaching us something we already got graded for?
Well, this is the formalization of that concept, but in that one, well, you don't have to look at it that way. It depends on what you use as your omega, right? Okay, so the probability of a 1 received and a 1 transmitted is, I think, 0.98 in the exam. Okay, and the probability of a 0 received but the 1 is transmitted is 0.02. And then the probability of a 1 received when a 0 is transmitted is 0.96. And the probability of a 0 received, oops, I take it back. This is 0.04. And this one is 0.96. Okay? But whether you look at it as conditional probability or not depends on what you see as your omega. Because you can see having 2 distinct omegas, then it's not conditional probability anymore. If you see only 1 single omega for everything, then yes, it is conditional probability. Okay. All right. So are we good with this stuff? Okay. So I'm going to leave that one on the board for now, and we're going to. Oh, great. Let's stay out for too long. All right. So in the same thing here, I also have to explain what is integer random variables and expectations law. Law of large numbers. The law of large numbers is actually pretty easy. You just have to right-click and Google search, and it will find the actual definition. Does anyone want to give it a guess? Okay, it's in probabilities, and it's called the law of large numbers.
The chances that it's a prime number?
No, it has nothing to do with prime numbers. Yep.
It's something about it. If we consider a large amount of numbers, then the probability will behave like a normal way.
the average will become,
Yeah.
it will get closer to the theoretical average.
Yeah.
Yep, that's exactly what it is. Okay, so we'll take a look at this one, just real quick, I cannot imagine how to really ask questions about this one. But we'll go through this, okay. The law of large numbers, LLN, is a theorem that describes the result of performing the same experiment a large number of times. According to the law, the average of the results obtained from a large number of trials should be close to the expected value.
Yes.
Yep.
For example, if we toss die,
Yep.
six-sided
Die,
die, yeah, for like million or billion times, it should be, all probabilities should be equal to 1/6 or moving towards.
Correct.
1/6.
Or the average number should be closer and closer to 3.5. Because 1 plus 6 plus 2 plus 5 plus 3 plus 4, if they're all 7, so the average is 3.5. Okay? So that's basically what it means. How does that apply to something that we have learned already? If I go to a casino, remember the coin flipping question?
Binomial theorem.
Yeah, well, that also, but if I go to a casino and I only observe, let's say, 20, okay, coin flips, can I really make an argument in a court and say, hey, this casino is using a coin that is loaded? No, but if I make hundreds of observations, thousands of observations, the higher the number of the observations, then the average should be closer and closer to the actual theoretical average, which is 0.5. So that means, that's basically what this theorem is saying, okay? The average, the observed average should approach the theoretical average as the number of samples increase. That's basically all it's saying, okay? But I'm not gonna, there's not much else to talk about, okay, except that that's, the theorem. All right. I like Wikipedia. But now we can move on to graphs, entries and stuff like that. Okay, graph is really kind of important because it is representing something that is really useful in computer science. Okay, so probability is useful too. Okay, lots and lots of applications, but so are graphs, and they can also be combined. So when you look at graphs, you can kind of combine that with probability. We'll see whether we have enough time to talk about a combination of graph theory and probabilities. Okay, because when they combine, it's kind of interesting. So graph theory is mostly just a whole bunch of terms, a whole bunch of definitions. So we'll just go ahead and go through these definitions. We'll take it slow. We only have about 20 minutes left, so we'll go a little bit slow today. A graph is a two-tuple, and so let's say G is representing a particular graph. It is a two-tuple. The first item of a tuple is V, which stands for vertices, or nodes, if you will. And the second item in the two-tuple is E, which stands for edges, or transitions, or links between the nodes. Okay? All right, so these are all kind of abstract terms. Let's just use an example. Okay? And this is where the document camera really comes in handy, because I can just do it here and it gets screen recorded.
Which doesn't hurt too. Are we still recording?
Oh, that's good. Good to check it first. Yep, we're still recording, and it is still recording, so we got space, so that's all good. All right. I have to get rid of the shadow somehow, because the shadow is actually casted by the document camera itself, which doesn't have its own light. That's the problem. It doesn't have its own LED lights.
Could
So
put a little
maybe-
light on it and just shine it down.
Or go to Harbor Freight, buy a a spool of duct tape and buy one of their LED light and strap it together.
Exactly.
And, yeah.
Well, you're right,
Yeah,
underneath
good
the
to go.
fluorescent, if you push it back, it might be a little less
Or if you
direct.
angle it.
Yeah, we just have to angle it. They used to have a light here. Mr. Fox requested a light to be placed on the table. Is it still here?
Yeah, the gooseneck up there, isn't that it?
This one?
Yeah.
Oh,
No, that's
the
an
other-
Elmo. That's a document viewer. This is a $900 document viewer that I cannot use in Linux. And here's my $100 one that I just carry with me, and it works okay. Maybe it's not the best, but it works okay. So what we'll do is we're gonna take a look at a picture, a graph of some kind, okay? So we'll just use A as a node here, B as a node here, C as a node here, and we have the D over here also as a node. So a node, a vertex, they are basically representing exactly the same thing. They are basically points in a graph, okay? So we now can draw edges. Now when we draw edges, there are two ways to do it. You can just say that there's an edge between A and B, okay? But that one this is not directional, which means you can go from A to B. It is also saying that you can go from B to A. This is one kind of graph. But you can also have a directed graph where edges are directed. So now you have an arrow indicating that you can only go from A to B using this edge. Now we might have a different edge going back to A, like so, to indicate that, you can also go from B back to A. So in general, a directed graph is quote unquote more general than a non-directed graph, because you can always represent a non-directed graph using a directed graph, but not the other way around. Is that okay? All right. So we'll just use directed graph for the time being. And then we have a way from B to D, like so. And then we have a way from C to D, and a way from B to C, like that. Okay, so let's say this is our graph, and the edges can represent, the nodes and edges can represent a variety of things, okay? You can look at A, B, C, D as intersections of a particular map, okay? And then the edges now represent the actual road or the path between the intersections. Now, if that is the case, in San Francisco, you definitely want to use directed graphs because there are a lot of one-way streets. Downtown Sacramento, exactly the same way, lots of one-way streets. And anytime you have anything that is not symmetric, you still want a directed graph. Let's say you're dealing with traveling between Sacramento and Davis, okay? Sometimes it's super congested one way and the other way is not impacted at all. So in those situations, you still want to use a directed graph because now you can associate a different cost depending on which edge you're labeling. Okay, so this is the graphical representation, but we want to use a set notation to represent this. So in this case, V, which is the set of all the vertices, is really just A, B, C, D, because the vertices are the individual points. Okay, what about the edges? Okay, E is the set of all the edges. Each edge is represented by a 2 tuple. So the first edge, let's say we're dealing with AB as an edge, it is just A, comma, B. That's an edge. Now the other way around is BA, which is a separate edge in a directed graph. In a non-directed graph, then you have a set of AB instead because ordering is not important in that case. Yep.
So how do you know which one you're doing?
The problem itself has to clearly indicate whether it's a digraph, which is directed graph, or just a general graph, which is not directed. Okay, and we also have an edge going from B to C. We have an edge going from B to D, and another edge from C to D. There we go. So we have the set of all the vertices, we have a set of all the edges, and G, which is representing this particular graph, is a 2 tuple of the sets. So we have set V and then set E as the members of this particular 2 tuple. And that's how a graph is represented. Are there any questions about what a graph is and how it is represented? Yep. Mm-hmm.
So the A comma B, B comma A just tells us to go both ways?
Correct. But in this particular case, only AB has two-way of traveling between them. B to C, there's only one way. C to D, there's only one way. And there's no direct edge going from A to C. And there's no direct edge going from A to D either. Okay. All right, well, since we are at this point, why do we want to study graphs? What do they represent and what kind of problems do we want to solve using these graphs? Say again?
The 7 bridges of Königsberg?
The 7
Bridges
Bridges.
of Königsberg?
Yep, that's one.
Something like that.
Salesman.
Traveling salesman problem, okay, that's another one. That one is that one assumes you have full connectivity, which means every edge, there's an edge connecting every single vertex to every other vertex. You can kind of see it that way too. Okay, so since I'm already on this topic, let's go ahead and talk about the cost of an edge, okay? So the cost of an edge, which is just C and then you specify the edge itself here. So let's say we're dealing with AB. You can associate a particular number, let's say a cost of 5, okay? So this is basically saying if you go from vertex A to vertex B, it will cost you 5. 5 of what? Well, we don't care, okay? It's 5 units of something, okay? So if you associate, cost going from one particular vertex to another vertex, then you can start to do fun stuff, like finding the shortest path, okay? What is the shortest path going from A to D here? There are 2 paths at least, because you can go from A to B and then to D, that's one path, but you can also go from A to B and then to C and then to D. Now when you look at a picture like this, it's pretty clear that we don't want to go through C. Why would we want to go through C? Well, but maybe the cost of the edge BC and the cost of edge CD added together is actually lower than the cost of BD. If that is the case, yeah, we want detour to C because it will save us some money. Okay, yep.
Does the cost of AB ever tell you anything about the cost of BA?
No, they're not implied. So in this case, one way can be more costly than the other way.
Okay.
Yep. That's a good question. They're independent. So when you look at it this way, if you look at C as a function, it is basically mapping, E. Yeah, it is. Okay, so it's mapping E, which is the set of all the edges, to some kind of real value. So I'm going to just use the real values here to represent the codomain of C as a cost function. Now, when you see something like this, then you can always say, well, there is an edge going from A to C. It's just that the cost is infinite. Okay, from the perspective of finding the shortest path, you can always look at it that way. It's like, yep, there's an edge here. It's just that it's extremely costly.
What would be the benefit to that?
I don't know.
Okay.
It's just like saying, okay, here's a positive charge, here's a negative charge. Is there a conductor in between? Yes, air is a conductor. You can arc across air, right? Now, if it's vacuum, it's a whole different thing. If it's vacuum, then you actually have to have enough plasma around the 2 poles before the charge has a way to go from one side to the other side. Yep.
Those are like different infinites though, right? Like if you don't have some conductive material between and you just have air, it's like, oh yeah, there's no path, it's infinite. But if you have like a vacuum, that's a different kind of infinite.
Right. It still means it's not possible to go from here to there, but you can say that theoretically there's an edge. It's just that the cost is so high we will never consider it. Yep.
There's a mountain there.
A mountain is not too bad. Vacuum is bad.
Yeah. To a guy in a wheelchair, I guess it'd kind of be the same thing. Just
Well,
saying.
it depends on whether the wheelchair has rocket engine. In which case, neither is going to be a problem. All right, so so the rest of this is really just a bunch of terms, term definitions. The order of a graph is the cardinality of only the vertices, it doesn't take the edges into consideration. Okay, so but that's just the name. Okay, when we say the order of a graph, it is just the cardinality of the vertices or the number of vertices. We call a graph simple if and only if, okay, let's see if we can understand this whole thing here. Okay, so don't read the in other words, okay? Just don't read the in other words. Okay, let's try to read the mathematical notation and see if we can figure out what it means. Okay, so we are saying for all v and for all w, lowercase, in V, which are the vertices, which basically means for all possible pairs of vertices V and W, this particular set is, we're looking at the cardinality of a set, okay? So let's see what this set is. This set is based on edges, okay? So these are the elements inside that particular set. So this is basically a set of edges. So E has to be first be an element of uppercase E, which means it's an edge. And we also want to specify that E equals to VW or E equals to WV. So that means we want something that is an edge in E already. And we also want just, it can be one or the other. Okay, this is not exclusive for, it can be one or the other or both at the same time. So edge can be, so this only applies to directed graph, obviously, because if the graph is not directed, then we will not see two tuples representing edges. So now we are looking at the cardinality of this particular set, and we want this set to be less than or equal to 1. What does that mean? Okay, first of all, the graph that we were just looking at earlier, is that simple or not? Let's just go back to the document viewer and look at this particular graph here. Based on the definition that we saw earlier, is this graph simple?
No.
It is not simple because AB and BA are both in the set when AB are V and W. So this graph is not simple. Okay, so switching back to this part here. In other words, there's only up to one edge between any two vertices. So if you can guarantee this across all the vertices in the graph, then the graph itself is considered simple. Okay, any questions about this? Yep.
So in your graph, you have A going to B and B going back to A.
Right.
Now, if there were an exponentially more nodes with accompanying edges, as long as it's not going back to itself, it's still going to be a simple graph.
No, it's not simple to begin with as it is. Because we have AB and BA at the same time.
But if you didn't have that, if you had A through Z, okay, and you had one edge going to each node, regardless of the directions, and it's not going back to another node, it's still a simple graph, right?
It cannot be, you cannot have two edges involving the same two vertices. Right. Basically that's what it is. Yep.
Okay. So if you had like two paths, I don't know, edges I guess, like AB and AB, both in the set of E, then it wouldn't be simple anymore, right? Like if you had two ways to get to the same place from.
That would still be simple. Simple simply means you cannot have two edges involving the same two vertices.
Yeah, but what if you had like AB was a cost of 3 and AB was a cost of 5 in the same.
Oh, it's AB and AB?
Yeah.
That would not be possible because remember E is a set, so AB cannot be both in the set. There can only be one AB in the set. Yep.
What if it was A to B, B to C, and then C back to A?
That would still be simple. Because if you look at all possible pairs of vertices, the set of edges for that particular pair will still be one or less. The cardinality of that set will still be one or less. So it will still be simple even though you have a loop. Yeah.
So the edges can only ever be 0, 1, or 2 because they either don't connect or do connect.
Yes.
Or connect back and forth.
Yep, exactly. So 0 is fine, 1 is fine, 2 is not. That's basically what it is. In order for something to be simple. Yep.
Can you draw an example of a multigraph?
A multigraph. A graph that is not simple is a multigraph?
Yeah.
Yes, sure, I can do that.
The one that we have.
Ding!
So that can be just for the police.
Because we have AB and then we have BA.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Yep.
Is the only way to represent AB and BA with two separate arrows, you could combine them to one with just points on each.
Turn it into a set.
Like a double arrow.
Direction doesn't matter.
Combining AB and BA.
So you see how you have two lines?
Yep.
You have two lines for one for A
Right,
and one for
correct.
BA. But it'd just be one line with the arrow thing on each
Not,
of them.
not in the case of a directed graph, because in the case of a directed graph, each one can have a different cost. In other words, if I write the cost along the edges, A to B can be, according to this 5, but going back can have a cost of 10.
Got it.
So I cannot combine both of those into a double-sided arrow, because then it wouldn't be clear which value applies to which direction.
Now, do all edges have to be directional? I mean, because if we were just to change that one into where you can travel either which way and it costs the same either which way, would that then make it a simple graph? Like if we turn instead of A, B, and BA, if we just made it like you said, it's a set in there where direction doesn't matter.
That's a good
That would
question.
make it a simple, right?
But then it won't be a directed graph anymore.
No, well, what I'm asking is, do all of them have to be directed for it to be a directed graph, or does it have to have directed path or edges?
That's a
in
good
it?
question.
It doesn't. I
have to look up whether multi-graph can or cannot be applied based on whether a graph is directed or not. The size of a graph, okay, this is just another kind of definition thing. The size of a graph is defined by the number of elements in E, but not the number of elements in V. So the number of elements in V determines the order. The number of elements in E determines the size. I mean, that's just terms. The complement of the graph is basically a complement of the edges. It's basically all the quote-unquote missing edges. Okay. So let's take a look at the complement of the graph that we just looked at here. So when you look at this one and we want to look at the complement, I'm going to use dotted lines here. Since this is a digraph or directed graph, so we are missing this one here, we're missing this one here, we're missing this one here, we're missing this one here, missing this one here, and we're missing two edges, one going straight from A to D, and then the other one going straight from D back to A. So the dotted lines represent all the other edges that could have been here but was not here in the original graph. So that's called the complement of a particular graph. The same vertices, just the quote-unquote opposite edges, the other edges, so to speak. Yep.
So you have a dotted line going from A to D.
B to D.
No, alpha to delta. That's
Alpha to delta.
So that's the very top, right?
Yes.
Do you need one to go from delta to alpha?
Yes, that's the bottom one.
What about from alpha to delta? I mean, never mind, I got it. Okay.
Yeah, so the complement has one going from A to D, and then the other one from D back to A.
Thank you.
Yep.
For a simple graph, imagine if you didn't have any kind of things going back and forth. Like we have right now, B goes to C and D also goes to D. Would that be simple?
Yeah, that would still be simple, because they're not involving the same vertices. They're not involving the same two vertices, to be exact. All right. So back to the definitions. Two vertices, V and W, are considered adjacent if they are directly connected by an edge. Okay, but in this case, they are connected by, can be an edge from V to W, can also be an edge from W to B. In a graph, G is VW, the edge of VW is known as a tail, and W is known as a head. In other words, this term is a little bit confusing, because normally we look at the first thing as the head, the second thing as the tail, but this has to do with how we draw the arrow. So when you look at an arrow, this is considered, okay, so when you look at an arrow, this is considered the tail of an arrow, this is considered the head of a tail. So when you look at the vertices on an edge, the one that is the quote-unquote tail is called a tail, but it is the first item of the two tuple. The head is actually the second item of the two tuple. But this is because of the arrow terminology more than anything else.
So it's the opposite of that arrow drawing right there.
Yeah?
Is-
No, this is correct.
Oh, it is like that.
It is like that. So in this case, BD, in the case of edge BD, B is the tail and D is the head. Because when we draw the edge, we draw the edge as an arrow going from B to D. So B is the tail of the arrow and then D is the head of the tail. Just terminology more than anything else. Okay, so we got this one, we got the next one now. The in degree is just basically how many edges go into a particular vertex, okay? So in the case of our graph, the, what is the term again? The in degree, I think, yeah. So the in degree of D is 2, the in degree of C is 1, the in degree of B is 1, and then the in degree of A is also 1. Well, we don't have any single vertex that has a 0 in degree in this case. If an edge has 0 in degree, it means it has to be the starting point or it is not connected to anything else. Or it's unreachable, I should say. Okay, so with the in degree, there's an out degree, which is exactly the opposite. How many edges are going out of a particular vertex? A graph is complete if for every pair of vertices that are not the same, not identical, there's an edge, then the graph is considered complete. Now, having said that, that means in certain cases, they're very rare cases, but you can have edges like that, going from A to A. But we don't want to deal with those graphs, okay? Because that's just usually not helpful in the analysis of graphs. Yep.
Can you also say that a graph is complete if its complement is an empty set?
Yes, that would be the other way to say that. Good job. All right. Note that self-loops are excluded. So, if you have a vertex A, the edge AA is excluded from the consideration of completeness. All right, here we have a walk, okay? So this is a walk, which is a W of a graph is an n tuple of vertices, assuming W bracket I denotes the ith item, which is 0 oriented, which is the same way you use indexes in C and C++, of the n tuple, and then bar W bar is the length of W, or the number of items of W. And then we want this to be the property of a walk. Okay, so let's go ahead and read this and see if we know what a walk is. All right, for all I, he's turning his head. Okay. Okay, so let's just look at this number here. Let's just look at this particular set here. This is a long way to express a simple thing. It really is just a range of numbers where we can start with 0 because they all have to be elements of the natural numbers. And natural numbers, when I was taught, starts with 0. Okay, I was told that in some other definitions they can start with 1, but this is assuming it is starting with 0. But we also have an extra constraint. X also has to be less than bar W bar minus 1, which means it can only run up to the index, the value index. It has to be less than the value index of the entire array. Okay? Because bar W bar minus 1 itself is the index of the last item of the array. So that means if X has to be less than that, that means we can only run up to 1 fewer than the 1 less than the last index of the entire array. Okay, so that put constraints on the for all. So in other words, it put a constraint on this I here. I can only be a valid index into the array, excluding the index of the last element of the entire array. So the rest of this really is the meat of the definition. We just want to say that Wi, comma Wi plus 1 is in E. Okay, so Wi is an index, is basically an element of the vertices, and we just want to make sure that each one, how should I put it, each consecutive element in the array, which is a vertex, there exists an edge to connect every single vertices in the tuple. Is that okay? Okay, let's look at an example. We're running out of time, aren't we? Okay, so we'll do one quick one. One really quick one. Okay, so W is a walk, so we can have a walk which is from A to B, back to A, back to B, and then to C, and then to D. That's a walk, okay? It's okay. Now, what is not a walk is this one. This is not going to be a walk. A, C, D is not a walk because AC has no edge connecting those two. Now, are they connected? Yes, they are connected, but there's no edge connecting straight from A to C. So that's why ACD is not a walk. But the other one, even though it has a loop inside, like I go from A to B, back to A, and then back to B, hey, it is still a walk. Okay, but there are different types of walks. Okay, so on Thursday we'll go through the other definitions, and then we'll look at all the other properties of a walk. All right, time to stop the recording.